Hollow Knight is an amazing game with a beautiful original soundtrack, fascinating characters, and intriguing plot. But what I'm going to focus on today is the art style, specifically the color scheme and dynamics of the three main opposing forces in Hallownest: the Radiance is light, the Pale King's light, and the darkness known as Void. So without further ado, let's make some light out of the situation. There are key differences between the Radiances and the King's Light, mainly the fact that the moss is represented by warm colors, shades of pastel pink, bright yellow and electrifying orange, while the worms is represented by a striking white with cool undertones. Think about all the blues in the Forgotten Crossroads, or the City of Tears, or even Green Path and Kingdom's Edge, where his influence is still prevalent through the cold shades of green. Even the areas which feature a differentiable color scheme, like the Crystal Peak and Fog Canyon, still feature an element of coolness to them, the sharpness of the crystal's magenta, or the mysterious purple shades in the background of the Fog Canyon. All of them contribute to the idea of a unified, rational, might I say eternal, kingdom. The only area which features mainly warm colors is obviously the hive, which, aside the fact that it would have been weird to have a purple hive, makes sense thematically as well. As Queen Vespa said, we play no part in its attempt at perpetuation, which brings me to my next point. I think there is no coincidence that the chromatic ambience in this game plays so well with the theme of nature versus nurture. The intellectual coldness of the worm is represented by his actions as well, granting higher minds to the bugs of Hallownest. Even the cryptic way of presenting information, through archaic speech, formally written tablets, and even his followers' words, mainly referring to Lurian and Monomon, resonates with the idea of superiority through learning. In contrast, both literally and figuratively, the Radiance pursues the primal instincts and desires of bugs, their hidden dreams. And we know that the Radiance was at first a goddess that protected the Moth tribe and turned aggressive and vengeful because of the king's intervention. For example, all of the moths in the kingdom died, except for one, who ironically enough is extremely cryptic until the very end, in which she explains the tragic tale of the goddess in a less cryptic manner, more direct, more sensitive. In that moment, she is remembering the Radiance, the motherly figure that was there from the beginning, nature itself. Going back to the hive, the whispering root tree in there says that the moth's light was somehow familiar, and it makes sense. The hive mind of the bees is really similar to hers, although a bit less murdery. Quoting again Queen Vespa, "To rail against nature is folly, all things must accept an end." Another interesting way to look at the king's influence upon Hallownest would be, simply put, the color white. He and his holy surroundings are more so described as pale or white rather than luminescent. Think about the White Palace, the White Defender, the Pale King, not the Pale Flower though. Chromatically speaking, the color white is absorbing all rays of light, so would it be a stretch to say that? Maybe. The bugs have been granted higher thought through first making them susceptible to light, aka bleaching their brains, and only afterwards being able to accept the light of the king. In that case, it would be obvious the fact that they will also be susceptible to the Radiance's light, and maybe that's why the Radiance couldn't assert dominance over their minds before the king's arrival. In the real animal kingdom, only mammals, birds, and possibly reptiles are biologically able to dream. So then the dreams of bugs must be in a metaphorical way. Their hopes, their inner desires. Not only must you have a higher level of intellect to be able to imagine things consciously. In fact, studies show that only humans and apes are able to do so. But there also needs to be a certain lack of stimuli. Going back to the phrase the Eternal Kingdom, it is quite possible that the bugs just got bored of the monotony that came with the organized thinking of the king. Nature, on the other hand, is always changing, metamorphosing into either something positive or negative. After all, isn't all white just a bit too boring? It's important to note that I'm not saying any of this is canon, I'm just pointing out some interesting symbolic meanings and drawing some parallels to real-life phenomena. Now that we have talked about light, let's dive into some void. Not in a literal sense though. Technically speaking, darkness is not something that exists in and on itself, but it's rather the absence of light that defines it. But in this fictional world, void is a manifestation of darkness not only in the absolute absence of light. Since we know that the ancient civilization predating Hallownest used or at least acknowledged the presence of void, but in a physical form as well. It is said to consume everything it touches. That's why the Radiance calls it an ancient enemy. That's why the king was afraid of it, and that's why he could afford throwing all his babies into a pool of dark matter. In this world, darkness controls light, not vice versa. The only physical manifestation of light would be soul, which would less have to do with the instincts or intellect, but rather life itself. So would void mean death then? Not necessarily, at least not in a literal sense. After all, our character, a product of light and void, is able to manipulate soul and is also dependent on it through its mask health. So they're basically light contained in void, their darkness being the material used, and light being the thing that gives it form. I can't say for certainty, but I think that the connection between light and void is less oppositional and more individual. Light doesn't need void or vice versa, but void can absorb the light. That is why the king was in search for the pure vessel, not only something without dreams, but something purely made out of void, the perfect emptiness. But little did he realize that, as it happened to the bugs under his rule, his power was the only thing that brought its demise, because no matter how hard you try, how many experiments fail, light and dark will always be ancient enemies. Thank you so much for sticking till the end. Let me know what other ideas or games you'd like me to cover, and I'll see you next time.